Every ancient culture looked up at the sky, down at the grave, and asked the same big questions, and came back with wildly different, wildly colorful answers. In this episode, we're covering 10 major mythologies, their core gods, how they said the world began, and what they believe happened after you die. Think of it as a cheat sheet, so you can finally stop mixing up Zeus, Odin, and Ra at parties. Greek mythology gives us the Olympians, 12 major gods living on Mount Olympus, led by the sky and thunder king Zeus, with his wife Hera, wise Athena, sea god Poseidon, and war god Ares rounding out the family. Their creation story starts with chaos, a formless void, which gives rise to primal beings like Gaia the Earth, who then birth the Titans, and the Titans get overthrown by their own Olympian children in a cosmic coup. What makes Greek myth distinct is how human its gods are. They're jealous, petty, funny, and get tangled in mortal love affairs and wars, like the whole Trojan War kicking off over a beauty contest. When you die, your soul heads to the underworld, ruled by Hades, where most people drift as shades in the gray fields of asphodel. The truly wicked suffer in Tartarus, and heroes get a permanent vacation in Elysium. This is the mythology behind Percy Jackson, Hercules, and half of Marvel's Thor comics borrowing villains. It's less about religious devotion today, and more the foundational language of Western storytelling. Basically, if a movie has a labyrinth, a minotaur, or a guy flying too close to the sun, Norse mythology comes from the Vikings of Scandinavia, and it centers on Odin, the one-eyed Allfather obsessed with wisdom, his hammer-swinging son Thor, the shape-shifting trickster Loki, and the goddess Freya. Their creation myth is wonderfully gruesome. The gods kill a primeval giant named Ymir and literally build the world out of his body. His blood becomes the seas, his bones the mountains, his skull the sky. Everything in Norse myth is haunted by Ragnarok, a prophesied apocalypse where the gods themselves are fated to die, fighting monsters like the wolf Fenrir and the serpent Jormungandr. Where you go after death depends on how you died. Warriors who fall in battle can go to Valhalla to feast and train for Ragnarok. Others go to Freya's Hall Folkvanger, and everyone else ends up in the shadowy realm of Hell. This is the mythology behind God of War's Norse saga, Marvel's Thor movies, and countless heavy metal album covers. What sets it apart is that fatalism. Even the gods know the world will end, and they show up to fight anyway. Egyptian mythology is one of the oldest continuously practiced belief systems in history, running for over 3,000 years. And it revolves around the sun god Ra, who sails across the sky each day and battles chaos each night. Osiris is the god of the afterlife, murdered and resurrected by his wife Isis, a story that becomes the template for Egyptian ideas about death and rebirth. Their creation myth describes the world emerging from Noon, an infinite dark ocean, with a mound of earth or a sun god rising up to bring order out of nothing. The afterlife is the real showstopper. After you die, the jackal-headed god Anubis weighs your heart against the feather of truth, and if your heart is lighter, you get eternal paradise in the field of reeds. If it's heavier, a monster called Ammit devours it, and you simply cease to exist. This obsession with the afterlife is exactly why the Egyptians built pyramids, mummified bodies, and buried pharaohs with treasure for the next world. You've seen this everywhere, from the Mummy movies to Yu-Gi-Oh's Egyptian gods cards. What's distinct here is how death isn't an ending, but a judged transition into a very literal second life. Hindu mythology is part of a living religion practiced by over 1 billion people today, and it's built around a trinity: Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer, alongside powerful goddesses collectively called Devi, like Durga and Kali. Unlike most mythologies with one creation story, Hinduism sees the universe as cyclical. It's created, sustained, destroyed, and recreated in an endless loop of cosmic time called kalpas. So there's no single ultimate beginning. Vishnu is famous for coming down to earth in different forms called avatars whenever the world needs saving, including as the heroic Prince Rama and the beloved Krishna. The afterlife here isn't a one-time judgment. It's reincarnation, where your soul is reborn again and again based on karma, the consequences of your actions, until you achieve moksha, liberation from the cycle entirely. This is the mythology behind epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and it's massively influential in shaping ideas of karma and yoga that spread worldwide. What makes it distinct is the sheer scale of time involved, and the goal of ultimately escaping existence rather than just reaching a nice afterlife destination. Mesopotamian mythology comes from the world's first cities in Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria, and it's arguably the oldest recorded mythology on Earth, giving us gods like Sky Father Anu, storm god Enlil, and the Babylonian champion Marduk. Their most famous creation story is the Enuma Elish, where the young god Marduk slays the monstrous sea goddess Tiamat and carves her body into the sky and earth, establishing order over primordial chaos. This is also home to the Epic of Gilgamesh, arguably humanity's oldest surviving story, featuring a flood myth that predates and closely resembles the biblical Noah story. Unlike the Egyptians' hopeful judgment, the Mesopotamian afterlife is bleak and democratic. Everyone, good or bad, ends up as a shadowy ghost, eating dust in the gloomy underworld called Kur, ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal. There's no punishment or reward system, just an unavoidable, joyless eternity, which honestly explains why so many Mesopotamian myths are obsessed with enjoying life while you can. This mythology quietly shaped later biblical stories and Greek myths through cultural contact. What's distinct is how it treats death, not as justice, but as an equal opportunity letdown. Chinese mythology isn't one neat system. It's a blend of ancient folk beliefs, Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucian ideas, all governed loosely by the Jade Emperor, the heavenly bureaucrat king of the gods. The most iconic creation myth features Pangu, a giant who hatches from a cosmic egg and separates the murky chaos into sky above and earth below, growing for 18,000 years until his body becomes the mountains, rivers, and stars. Another key figure is Nuwa, a goddess with a serpent's tail who molds humans out of yellow clay and later repairs a broken sky using colorful stones. The afterlife concept here is heavily shaped by Buddhist influence. Souls travel through a series of underworld courts, judged for their deeds, sometimes reincarnated, and family ancestor worship matters enormously, since the living are expected to honor and provide for their dead relatives. This mythology gives us the Monkey King from Journey to the West, dragons as lucky water spirits rather than villains, and countless anime and game characters. What makes Chinese mythology distinct is how tightly it's woven into real practice traditions like ancestor veneration and Lunar New Year, rather than being purely a mythological curiosity. Japanese mythology comes from Shinto, Japan's indigenous belief system, and centers on Amaterasu, the sun goddess, considered the ancestor of the imperial family, along with her storm god brother Susanoo. The creation story features the divine couple Izanagi and Izanami, who stand on the floating bridge of heaven and stir the primordial ocean with a jeweled spear, and the drops that fall off create the islands of Japan. There's a famous myth where Amaterasu, offended by her brother's behavior, hides in a cave and plunges the world into darkness, until the other gods trick her out with a mirror and celebration, a story tied to the origins of Shinto ritual itself. Shinto doesn't have one fixed afterlife doctrine. Instead, the dead can become kami, spirits or minor deities that are honored at shrines, and ancestor reverence blends with Buddhist ideas of reincarnation that arrived later. Countless kami inhabit nature itself. Rivers, mountains, and forests all have their own spirits, which is why respect for nature is baked into the mythology. This is the DNA behind Studio Ghibli films like Spirited Away and games like Okami. What's distinct is the sheer intimacy of it. Gods aren't distant rulers. They're present in a torii gate, a fox statue, or a quiet forest shrine. Mayan and Aztec mythology come from Mesoamerica, and while they're distinct civilizations, they share overlapping gods and themes. Most famously, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god of wind and learning, worshipped across the region. The Maya believed the gods tried and failed to create humanity multiple times, first from mud, then from wood, before finally succeeding with people made from maize or corn, meaning literally, in their myth, humans are made of corn. Their epic hero story, the Popol Vuh, follows twin brothers Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who outwit the death gods in a deadly ballgame through Xibalba, a 9-level underworld full of trials and trickery. The Aztecs believed the sun itself needed to be fed with human sacrifice to keep moving across the sky, a genuinely central and often misunderstood part of their religious worldview, tied to cosmic survival, not casual cruelty. Where you went after death depended less on morality and more on how you died. Warriors and sacrificial victims went to the sun's paradise, while most people traveled a difficult 4-year journey through Xibalba. This mythology inspired Pixar's Coco, the Mesoamerican ballgame culture, and modern Day of the Dead imagery. What's distinct here is the deep connection between astronomy, calendars, and mythology. These cultures built precise calendars specifically to track when gods needed appeasing. Celtic mythology comes from pre-Christian Ireland, Britain, and Gaul, and it's a bit different because it's less about a clean creation story and more about legendary waves of settlers, especially the Tuatha De Danann, a race of godlike beings who arrive in Ireland with magic and mastery, described in the Book of Invasions. Key figures include the Dagda, a fatherly god of abundance with a magic cauldron that never runs empty, the fierce war goddess the Morrigan, who appears as a crow on battlefields, and Lugh, a master craftsman and warrior god associated with light and skill. Rather than one clear afterlife realm with judgment, Celtic belief centers on the otherworld, a parallel magical land, sometimes underground or across the sea, where it's always summer, nobody ages, and heroes can sometimes visit and return. Think Tir na Nog, the land of youth. Death isn't necessarily final or scary in these myths. The otherworld and the human world blur constantly, especially during festivals like Samhain, the origin of Halloween, when the boundary between worlds thins. This mythology is the root of legends like the Tuatha De Danann's magic, banshees, and later gets blended into King Arthur folklore. What makes Celtic myth distinct is that fluid boundary between life, death, and magic. It's less about strict rules and more about mysterious, permeable realms. Slavic mythology comes from pre-Christian Eastern and Central Europe, and while records are sparser than Greek or Norse myth, because it was mostly oral, the core rivalry is between Perun, the thunder god of order, and Veles, a shape-shifting god of the underworld, cattle, and chaos, who constantly clash in a cosmic battle. The goddess Mokosh oversees earth, fertility, and fate, spinning the threads of destiny, much like figures in other mythologies. Creation stories vary by region, but many describe a cosmic world tree connecting sky, earth, and underworld, or a primordial egg from which the world hatches. The Slavic afterlife involves ancestral spirits watching over living relatives, a paradise-like realm called Rai for the honored dead, and deep respect for household and nature spirits like the Domovoi, a small house guardian you're supposed to keep happy with offerings. Much of Slavic mythology survived by blending into folk customs and fairy tales, even after Christianity arrived, which is why witches like Baba Yaga and her walking chicken-legged hut are still famous today. This mythology shows up in games like the Witcher series, which draws directly on these old gods and spirits. What's distinct is how much of it survives disguised inside folklore and superstition, rather than formal religious texts. And there you have it. 10 mythologies, 10 different answers to where we came from and where we go next. From corn people to cosmic eggs to a heart weighed on a golden scale. Next time you watch Percy Jackson, God of War, or Spirited Away, you'll actually know whose myths you're borrowing. If this helped you finally sort your Zeus from your Odin, from your Quetzalcoatl, subscribe for more. The Pantheon's just getting started.